make sure that's running. Go ahead and turn this off. There. Awesome. Okay. Ba, 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 ba. All right. So this is where we ended last time. Basically, Portugal really running the show in terms of exploration beyond Europe and breaking into the slave trade in Africa and really shifting how things were done in terms of slavery, and definitely for the worse. Now, this is where I meant to get last time, but it's fine. So part of the reason for the shift was how the Europeans viewed, in particular, the West Africans, because they were familiar with the cultures in North Africa, largely the Muslims that they were fighting, and the large kingdoms like Egypt in the eastern part of northern Africa. So it's either Muslims who have equal or even greater technology than Europe, or Egypt with its ancient wonders beyond European understanding. So pushing into Western Africa, they run into tribes that are typically less advanced technologically. Often there are tribes there that have been at war, and they are selling the captives of war who are already dirty, tired. I don't know why the book went with tired and exhausted, but same thing, I guess. And this began to characterize how Europeans viewed the Africans, again, at least sub-Saharan Africa. So this ingrained the Europeans' view of race, particularly of people who were assigned by God into a life of bondage, and this was going to come up a lot, especially as we get into North America, and, well, we'll get there. There was this Christian belief that considered Africans to be the cursed sons of Ham, so there was this moral impetus for slavery. There's this Old Testament story of after the flood, Noah got drunk and passed out in the nude. And he was, 500 years old at this point, so I'm sure that looked wonderful. And I guess Ham showed up, and he's like, "Dad, why are you naked?" And he just laid there. And then his other son showed up and covered him up, because nobody wants to see that. But Ham wasn't good enough to cover him up, apparently, and therefore all his descendants are cursed to be in a life of servitude, because the Old Testament was weird. So yeah. Now obviously, Africa being a whole freaking continent was not simply characterized by a few tribes on the western coast. There were multiple highly civilized kingdoms, other smaller societies, many of whom actually did convert to Christianity and begged for the Portuguese to end the slave trade, because, hey, you technically can't enslave other Christians according to your book that you have used to convert us, right? And the Portuguese were like, no. Still, though, as bad as all this was, and it was bad, it will get worse, because this was before the idea of perpetual slavery. The Africans were put alongside other bound labor, peasants, indentured servants, criminals, apprentices. Slavic workers were still in the majority in terms of you have to work a certain number of years and then we'll kick you out and give you a little bit of land that's awful, and maybe you'll live long enough to work it. So this was before it got as bad as, antebellum South slavery. But this was certainly the beginning. Also, one of my favorite images, I told you guys that there was going to be some interesting medieval art, and hoo boy, when the first explorers went through Western Africa, I don't know if they were like delirious from fever or what, but this is the reports that went back to Europe of what the Africans looked like. Yeah. I don't know what's happening. Like, is that even racist? Or is it just like, are these moon men? Also, I like that there's a lion cub in the background and also what appears to be an armadillo. And they're like about to have a battle. I don't know.
They have hair.
They have hair, which actually bothers me because this one appears to be like hairless, but then apparently from the back it starts right here and then goes down. It's like a extreme mullet. Very weird.
And then not just like two of them, all of them.
All of them, yes.
Even though it's
There's also whatever's going on here. Now, I think this might be a stage play that they put on in Europe, so it's supposed to be symbolic rather than literal, I guess. I don't know. But then there's also this. And it's like, did they meet Bigfoot? What's happening? Why are their heads in their chests? I don't get it. But see, like, these don't have, like, weapons or, the loincloths, or they're in a village. They're just, like, standing out in the woods. These feel like some kind of cryptid. So, yeah, if any of y'all have nightmares tonight, I apologize. But this is what's going on. Also, that horse, though. So, yeah. That's a thing that happened. Moving away from that, let's actually cross the Atlantic and get started on the genocide. So it was the expanding Norsemen that actually discovered North America first, at least as far as Europeans were concerned, around 1000 CE. But they abandoned it by about 1450 because there was the little ice age that caused a expansion of glaciers, and it really wiped out their settlements, which were in like Nova Scotia and northern Canada. And you don't want to be in northern Canada when the glaciers are encroaching. They also settled Greenland and Iceland. They were also the ones that named Greenland and Iceland because they were jerks. It was great because Iceland was nice and temperate, relatively speaking, and Greenland was a frozen hellscape. So like, let's name them the opposite so we can trick our rivals, and they did, and it was, the joke still stands. Of course, the one we all know about is the navigator from Genoa in 1492, Christopher Columbus. My Italian friend went to college in Genoa, so she's got a slight bias for that. I'm like, Columbus was kind of a piece of shit, but we'll talk about that. He tried to get everybody to fund his expedition west to get to the east, and nobody would listen to him. And it wasn't because they're like, oh, the world's flat and you'll fall off the edge. That's dumb elementary school stuff that's just like, oh no, this is the simplistic thing, so we don't have to explain to you what's going on. Columbus thought the world was much smaller than it was, so he could just go west and then be in Japan. And most other people were like, no, the world's actually very big, and if you go west, you're going to be in the ocean for a long time, and you're going to die. Which he almost did, and his crew nearly killed him. And had this continent not been here, either they would have all died or his crew would have killed him. Because had it been like the combination Atlantic-Pacific Ocean, just one big body of water, they wouldn't have made it. So yeah, again, Spain needed to do something different because they couldn't use the Mediterranean because that's where the Italian city-states were. They couldn't go around the tip of Africa because Portugal's down there, so they had to do something different. So Queen Isabella made the decision to agree with Columbus's plan because while Spain had a king and queen, they were essentially equally as powerful as the other, although one could argue Isabella was stronger than Ferdinand in a lot of cases. She was very powerful. She held her own land. She was very strong-willed, and Ferdinand wasn't typically going to argue against her for most of what she did because she was also very smart. So he's like, if you think so, fine. Let's see what happens. So it took a little over a month to get across the Atlantic. Again, Columbus's men nearly killed him because they were running out of supplies. And then they found an island, which Columbus named San Salvador, which is to say his savior because his men were about to kill him. Once again, like the Cape of Good Hope, because thank God we found something. He thought he found the Indies, even though nothing that he found equated to any of the tales from Marco Polo. He's like, oh no, we're definitely in China. And there's, all these natives in the Bahamas. Oh no, we're totally in China. Where's all the big buildings, Columbus? No, we're definitely here. Where's all the big buildings, Columbus? So the Pope unilaterally declared that any land discovered to be under the control of Spain, but Portugal whined about it. So anything east of Cape Verde Islands was given to Portugal. Long story short, that's why Brazil speaks Portuguese. So Portugal got Brazil, and everything else was basically Spain. Although Spain tended to stay south, and that's why you've got Britain and what is now America and France. Well, France and England swapped back and forth with what is now the United States and Canada for a little while, which we'll get to that. Anyway, here's Leif Erikson and his boys. They crossed the Atlantic in that. In that. Yeah. Yeah, we've got plenty of evidence that they made it. In like the North Atlantic.
This is real dangerous.
Yes. Well, their boats were serious business. But still. Yeah, I wouldn't like that very much. No. And here's Columbus and his boys about to do them a genocide. I mean, technically they already are because they're standing there spreading germs just by existing. There's Isabella. If you guys take my, which European history course do we talk about Isabella in? 103? Yeah, we'll talk a lot about Isabella. Anyway, there's the line of demarcation because Portugal was also doing a lot of stuff in the Canary Islands and the Cape Verde Islands. Again, not super important. You don't need to know all of this, just letting you guys know why Brazil is basically Portuguese. I've got a map in just a little bit that actually shows you Leif Erikson's route, and it was like, he was hitting like land along the way. He was got to Iceland and then Greenland and then like Nova Scotia. So it wasn't like all water all the way. But still, not exactly a pleasure cruise. So Columbus went back to the Caribbean twice more to claim more land for Spain, but he instituted a system known as incognita. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Basically, leading men in the expedition received land, and the natives had to provide labor. It's essentially New World feudalism. By the time he died in 1506, Columbus had lost the support of Spain. The islands under Spanish rule were in chaos. Columbus had actually been brought back to Spain in chains due to his mismanagement of the colonies and the substantial damage he had done to the colonies, which is to say the multiple genocides he had incited. Columbus did not die a hero. In fact, the only reason we know about him is because of the mistreatment of the Italian Americans in the 1800s, and they were like, hey, we need to find a way to like incorporate ourselves into the American psyche. So they looked back into history and they found this asshole, and they're like, hey, Italians have a place in American history, let's do that. And so they like scrubbed out some of the bad stuff and like, hey, look, Italians are important in American history, and that's why we even know Columbus was the thing, because the Italian Americans were being horribly mistreated in the 1800s, which again, we'll get into in 102, yeah. So by this point, nobody believed we were actually in China, because obviously. But it's like, hey, though, there's new land, which means new resources to exploit. John Cabot, or Caboto, because of course another Italian, in fact another Genoese, he sailed for the English, explored further north in the Atlantic, discovered what was basically eastern Canada, and England's like, cool, thanks. We're not going to do anything with it for like almost a century. I don't know why. England's usually pretty opportunistic. Maybe they were fighting a war. England tends to fight wars all the time. See, 1500s, I don't know when England... No, the War of the Roses was earlier than this. I don't know what they were up to. I'll have to look back. So the Portuguese and Spanish were the main ones in the Caribbean. Amerigo Vespucci, who was also Italian, he wasn't really an explorer. He mostly was a writer. He went along with other expeditions and just like wrote about what he saw. And his accounts were so vivid and not entirely true. But they led to the mapmaker Martin Waldseemüller, that dude's German if you can tell, to dub the new continent, which was technically South America, as America, because America is the feminine name for Amerigo. In fact, another name for America is Columbia, which is the feminine version of Columbus, which is why, for example, our state capital is Columbia, and why, like, D.C. is District of Columbia. That's just another name for the American continents. Just FYI. Anyway, here's the incognita systems. I actually learned this when I was taking the Protestant Reformation course in grad school with a Catholic Dominican friar, which is Catholic friar, as my professor. He was interesting. So yeah, the plan for the incognita system, the Spanish would protect, care for, and Christianize the natives, and the natives would work a portion of their time for the Spanish settlers. What actually happened, the Spanish forced long labor, did not pay the natives, and would not protect the natives, seized land, and the natives would die from disease, which was the main thing. Harsh living and working conditions. Eventually, there were clergy protests. We'll talk about that in just a little while, with one of my professor's favorite boys, and then they replaced it with the ripartimento, which eventually became just as abusive. So, you know, oh, here we go. Here's everybody. So we've got early voyages. They got to Iceland. Eric the Red got to Greenland. Leif Erikson, Blarney Hjorthenson, he might have seen North America. He never landed in North America. And then Leif Erikson actually got to North America.
Did they actually put flags there? They commented.
They didn't. They settled in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Yeah, there are evidence of settlements, but I don't know if they I don't know if they were part of Swedish governmental expansion. They were just explorers, because there was a lot of that sort of, like the Vikings that were raiding in England and northern Europe. They weren't really part of an organized invasion force. They were just doing whatever they wanted. So that's what a lot of this was. They're just like, let's just go west and see what happens.
Fun when they came. Maybe not from that street.
So yeah. Yeah, in fact, Leif Erikson left from Greenland. So they had settlements in Greenland. And he sailed along the coast of Greenland and then went down and found Newfoundland. Anyway, here's Amerigo Vespucci's travels. So again, he was very familiar with South America. In fact, most of the European explorers were from the Bahamas south. There wasn't a lot of exploration to the north for some reason, except for obviously these boys and then John Cabot. Oh yeah, these really old maps that are actually kind of impressive considering the day. Obviously it's wonky and stretched out because you got to account for the curvature of the Earth as much as you can on a 2D map. In fact, you've got the two sides from the top there to see what they can see. Now, they haven't crossed into the Pacific yet, so that's why North America is just like a little sliver. We'll see another one in a little bit once they have crossed into the Pacific. And it's really impressive how good the map is just from them sailing around and charting. I mean, my little brain is just like, I wouldn't know what anything looked like until we got satellite images. I can't navigate. So, speaking of crossing to the Pacific, Vasco Núñez de Balboa traveled across the Isthmus of Darien, which is now Panama, became the first European to see the Pacific Ocean. Juan Ponce de Leon found Florida, because, when people are just rampaging through the Bahamas, Florida's right there, but if you can't see it, you don't know to go that way. Oh, it's Magellan. I keep forgetting where Magellan is. Okay, here's Magellan. Magellan set off from Spain in 1519, the intent of circumnavigating the globe. However, he had a lot of trouble. They had scurvy, hostile natives, bad weather, open mutiny, before they even got around South America. But they did arrive in the Philippines in March of 1521, and Magellan died there. But one of the original 5 ships and 18 men, which for a ship that size, not a lot of dudes, did make it back to Spain in September of 1522, loaded with spices, which allowed Spain to claim the Philippines. And I have a short documentary of this trip, which I will get to in just a moment. Hopefully, for you online folks, this will work. If not, the link will be there. Because I'm going to play a YouTube clip for a YouTube stream. It's probably not going to work, but whatever. So here's a map. This is Balboa's trip across the Isthmus of Panama, which was not called the Isthmus of Panama at the time. This is why they called that the Pacific Ocean, because it's like, oh, it's so peaceful here. It's like, dude, you're basically in a big bay. The Pacific Ocean is not peaceful. But, you know, you get the right of naming, and you call it that first, and now it sticks. There's Ponce de Leon. He's like, oh, here's a landmass. We're going to claim that for Spain. I'm not touching it. I'm not getting on, like, we're going to land at St. Augustine, but we're not going around this thing. It's full of mosquitoes and alligators. Forget that. Which, you know, fair. Here's Magellan's trip. Well, Magellan's cruise trip. And we'll get there. Okay. Now let's see how well this works. Okay, add. You can wait just a minute. Oh my God, why do these ads have to be so long? I don't want to shop at Wish. Okay. Now let's see if I can get this over here. The stream's current bit rate is lower than blah blah blah. Yeah, I get it. Okay, so it's everywhere it's supposed to be. So let me do this. It's not muted.
All the words in the English language. Keep singing along, and we'll be back with more.
No idea this is gonna work. Oh.
There once was a man, his name was Magellan, a Portuguese skipper, the girls found him cute. He sailed with 5 ships to find the East Indies, then come back to Spain with a bounty of loot. Whoopee-tie-I-O, oh happy Magellan, starting your journey with hardly a care. Whoopee-tie-I-O, strong brave Magellan, you'll find the East Indies, you just don't know where. They crossed the Atlantic and spotted a country. Magellan said,
"It's the East Indies at last!"
but then someone shouted,
Hey, that's Argentina!
Magellan got cranky and chopped down the mast. Whoopee-tie-I-O, settle down, Magellan. Put down that axe, there's no time to despair. Whoopee-tie-I-O, keep trying, Magellan. You'll find the East Indies, you just don't know where. A great storm arose in the mighty Pacific. The 5 little ships were diminished to 3. At last land was sighted, Magellan was happy. But then someone shouted,
Hey, that's Chile!
Whoopee-tie-I-O, cheer up, Magellan. Check out your map and don't tear out your hair. Whoopee-tie-I-O, keep trying, Magellan. You'll find the East Indies, you just don't know where. It took them 5 months months, but they crossed the Pacific. They spotted a land that was dotted with palms. Magellan proclaimed,
Yes, that's the East Indies.
but then someone shouted,
Hey, I think that's Guam.
Ay, 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 ay! Oops, Magellan, your fun little journey's become a nightmare. Whoopie-tie-I-O, keep trying, Magellan. You'll find the East Indies, you just don't know where. They sailed due west to the Philippine Islands. Magellan was pleased as the natives drew near. But then someone shouted, I think they're attacking. Magellan said,
What?
And got hit by a spear. Whoopie-tie-I-O, farewell, Magellan. You almost made it, it's really not fair. Whoopie-tie-I-O, oh ghost of Magellan. The East Indies Islands were right over there.
All right, let me grab this. Yoink. All right, and get back to that. Okay. So, that was our musical interlude. I think that might have actually worked for the stream. That'd be nice. So, a lot of these trips weren't just, well, especially with, not Francisco Pizarro, wrong dude, Amerigo Vespucci, weren't just like countries or royalty paying explorers to go and, explore and then claim land for the crown. A lot of it was just like explorers going and doing things and writing down what they saw or claimed they saw, because we saw some of the writings or drawings. And so a lot of this was sent back to Europe and spread not just among the royalty but the population. So being able to print and distribute maps and also the journals of these explorers was due to advances in printing and charting. So the Chinese, of course, were ahead of the game on this. They've been printing, using woodblock printing as far back as the 10th century, which is 900 CE. Johann Gutenberg, despite, again, the simplistic, make sure this is on, okay. The simplistic answer being, oh, he invented the printing press. Not really. He modified the Chinese printing press to work for European letters and then claimed he invented it because, of course. And then he got in some legal trouble and the government took all his assets and just like made them public use, and everybody in Europe basically had access to printing presses within like 10 years. So yeah, this, as I said, meant the journals of European explorers were, and the maps from the cartographers were printed and circulated all over Europe, which further increased interest in this new land that they had found, this new world, which again, not exactly new. The natives had been there for thousands of years, but not like that changed anything for the Europeans. And then meanwhile, over in North America, the natives did, of course, have their own way of charting land. The Mayans, for example, had glyphs that they carved on large flat stones called stela, describe things from land boundaries to history. Stela still to this day are fascinating and not entirely understood. What's left after the Spanish got done doing what they do. So here's the Chinese woodblock print. Again, easier than constantly having to write all that out. Just print it. Here's the print shop. Yes, the apprentices were not paid. They typically had I'd say the easier job, because the actual doing the print work was actually physically difficult. And then you had the ink blotters, which were typically the journeymen. These are ink blotters. So you got the guy there in the back. You just take those and put those on the actual block printers. And also they would put the type in the right place, and that was tedious work. The kids would fetch the paper and usually sweep up and go get beer for everybody. The menial tasks. Here is a more accurate map, which is quite nice. Again, they didn't quite have the West Coast fully fleshed out yet, but they've got a lot of South America mapped out. Europe, Asia, and Africa are a bit closer. They've still got Africa a little bit larger than I think it is. Although no, Africa's actually really big. Our flat map makes Africa look smaller than it actually is. But I do like how they have where Antarctica is. They don't know. They just wrote that. At least incognita. We haven't seen it. We don't know what's down here. So that's nice. They just literally, we don't know. We haven't been down here, and it's too damn cold. We're not messing with that. Which, in the ships of the day, don't mess with that. Okay, what next? So getting into the genocide. First things first, lots of disease. So the Spaniards moving in, that's an email, sorry. Aided by disease, Native Americans were wholly lacking immunity for common European diseases. So the Europeans didn't even have to be sick. They've had these diseases in Europe for hundreds, if not thousands of years, so they just were carriers for it at this point. The Inca Empire, for example, fell from 9 million in 1530 to less than 500,000 by 1630. Aztecs and the Maya, for a combined total of 40 million, fell to about 3 million by 1650. And we talk about the Black Death and how terrible that was. And that was a third to a half of the population, which is bad, but this is 90 to 95% of the population over the course of 100 years. This is not recoverable. This is the civilization being wiped out entirely. I mean, when we talk about the Black Death, it's there weren't enough people around to bury the bodies. It's there's not enough people around at all. When you go from 9 million people to 500,000 people in 100 years, that's not a tenable society anymore. So, in addition to this, it was the partial immunity of the people of Africa to malaria and yellow fever that made them attractive to traders wanting to set up shop in the Caribbean, because the Caribbean, while it was good for growing, say, sugarcane, it was also full of mosquitoes, and mosquitoes are full of malaria and yellow fever. Europeans also introduced pigs and iron to America. So this began what was called the triangular trade. They would I'll just go ahead and put up this last one. So they take American resources, like the stolen gold, which we'll talk about that towards the end of the thing. Actually, it might be the next slide even. Maize, potatoes, tobacco, and cocoa, and tomatoes. Tomatoes aren't native to Europe. They would take these to Europe. Sugar was developed in Asia, but it grew very well in the Caribbean. So labor was taken from Africa to America to make raw resources, which were brought to Europe to turn into finished products. And eventually, as we'll see, once colonies are put in America, these raw resources, these finished products rather, are sent back to America to be sold. So here we have the exchange. Actually, tomatoes were considered poisonous for a while. Couple of reasons. One, they're actually directly related to the nightshade plant, which if you're familiar at all with what nightshade is, it will kill you. You don't touch nightshade. But two, only the rich people had access to tomatoes when they first came over. And rich people tended to eat off pewter plates. And if you don't know what pewter is, it's very pretty. It makes a good plate or a good bowl, but it's full of lead. And normally that's not a problem if you're eating like bread or, whatever out of the bowl. But tomatoes are very acidic, and they leach that lead right out of that bowl. And so the rich dudes were just like eating a nice cocktail of tomato and lead. So, no real loss. And as I said before, horses weren't native to North America. Neither were cattle, sheep, pigs, etc. Or even bananas, which when you think of like South America and Central America, you think bananas, but yeah, they weren't native to those regions either. And then, of course, all the fun diseases the Europeans brought over: smallpox, influenza, typhus, measles, malaria, diphtheria, whooping cough. The stuff what kills you fast. So, sorry about that. Onto this. So the French and English were not doing a very good job in terms of holding on to what little bit they had. We'll talk about what little bit they had in a moment. The Spanish actually were doing so well, they broke the economy. We'll talk about that in a moment. I'm going to try to get to that in a moment. We still got 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So because it took like a month to get to the Americas, the Spanish crown granted the leaders quite a bit of leeway. They had vast tracts of land, native labor, again, basically this incognita system. And the leaders would parcel out their land to their own men, again, very much like the feudal system. But that meant that the people that they were giving their bits of land to didn't actually have the authority that they were given. In short, lots of abuse happened. Diego Velázquez, whatever, governor of Cuba. So he gave Cortez the right to explore along the coast of South America. He did not have the right to attack the Aztecs. Can you guess what he did? He attacked the Aztecs. Now, it wasn't just that he rolled in and started, busting up the Aztecs. He saw that, well, for one, they treated him very well. But also he saw that there were elements within the Aztec Empire that were wanting to overthrow the chief, Montezuma. So he created alliances, actually walked around the empire a lot, spread smallpox, then came back, and while they were all dying of smallpox, overthrew Montezuma. There are also writings from the soldiers of the cities of the Aztecs, and how they felt like they must be in some kind of dream because they were so magnificent. As I said, they were compared to Versailles, which, Versailles and also Venice, which were considered, the most magnificent cities in Europe. And here they are destroying what's supposed to be this group of savages, but they've got this city that's greater than anything in Europe. Again, mainly smallpox. So he took over the capital of the Aztecs and built Mexico City on top of it. And then just also the Incas were destroyed by Francisco Pizarro, who was the cousin of Cortez, I believe. So, same thing, basically. If you want more details, Francisco Pizarro, with only 168 men and 67 horses, conquered the vast Inca Empire in present-day Peru. They were aided by the spread of European diseases, conflicts among people subjected to Inca rule, et cetera, et cetera. Ensured Spanish access to vast supplies of silver. Yeah. So, here's the route that Cortez took. Like I said, he went through and then came back. Made sure to spread things around. Here, I believe, is a Spanish illustration of the siege of the capital. They were using ships, so it's not exactly as small. Well, just build them on a lake. This is the fall of Montezuma. And then the path that Pizarro took. Oh yes, and Pizarro and his boys murdering the Inca. So, they've ransacked the Maya and the Inca. So now, okay, well, let's head north through Mexico and see what else we can find. Geographically speaking, what's north of Mexico? What's that? What? North of Mexico is just what's in terms of geography? Texas. What is Texas in terms of land mass? Well, yes, big, but it's a lot of big what? A lot of big nothing. Especially the further west you go, it becomes desert. So groups of Spanish adventurers decided to head into North America in 1526. Wanting more treasure, but found starvation, disease, and pissed off natives. The thing about the big native empires was that they were concentrated groups of people that you could easily give disease to, and they would spread it through their ranks and kill basically all of them at once, and then you could just go in and loot the treasure off the dead bodies. With these more sparsely populated groups, you couldn't do that as easily, and also they didn't have all the gold. So it wasn't really worth it. Now, they did discover the pueblos, the cities and well, not really the cities, but the villages carved in the cliffs. So, of course, they see this and oh, there are cities of riches carved in the cliffs. There's gold everywhere. This is where the the city of El Dorado myth comes from. It's like, oh, it's made of gold. So Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, went north in 1540 to find it. He found nothing but small villages, so he terrorized the region, burning towns and villages before returning to Mexico. So he just got pissed off and murdered a bunch of people and then left. Because, you know, that's the mature thing to do, I guess. Oh, this one I like. So Hernando de Soto decided to take a different tactic. So Florida had technically been claimed by Ponce de Leon, so he's like, okay, we'll land in Florida, we'll head north and see what we can do. So he went through Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas on foot. So I'm sure that was fun. Yeah. I hope he started in the winter, where it's at least, 60 degrees. On the way back, though, he ran into Chief Tuscaloosa. Chief Tuscaloosa and his boys beat the hell out of this guy. Now, they didn't get defeated and captured. I'm guessing they won, or at least fought off Chief Tuscaloosa. But they took a lot of casualties, and they didn't find what they were supposed to find. So technically, this was a failure. So, just a few days march from the supply ships. They've taken a lot of casualties. The boys are hurt. They're low on supplies. What are you going to do? You're going to turn around. You're going to leave the supply ships, go through Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And in 1541, 2 years after this thing started, becoming the first Europeans to report seeing the Mississippi River. And then they sailed down the river and went back to Mexico because they were just tired of this crap. Walking around southern U.S. for 2 years, forget that. And it's all woods, there's nothing cleared. I mean, if you find something cleared, there's natives there, and they probably don't want you there. Chief Tuscaloosa didn't want them there. So even though this did not go the way they wanted it to go, technically, this expedition allowed Spain to claim all this land because, hey, the Spanish walked around there, therefore it's ours now. And also because Europeans were just walking disease vectors, it exposed more tribes to disease and began whittling down the population. So it worked for the Spanish, even though De Soto got spanked. Oh, and he didn't live through the expedition, by the way. There's Coronado. I'm not sure. Here's Tuscaloosa. I'll show you the map of what he was doing. So here's his journey. So he got up to North Carolina, was coming back, and then got hit. And he's like, we're just going to go back, and just went through Tennessee and Alabama and all of that. And then he died. Look, he went all the way through Arkansas and then came back and then died right there at the Mississippi River where the red ends. And then Luis de Moscoso went back into Texas, then I guess came back, and then they took the Mississippi River down and sailed to Mexico. So yeah, I don't know, it's the 1500s, he probably died of disease, honestly. Or maybe one of his dudes shot him in the back. It's like, we're done. According to this, it was 4 years, 1539 to 1543. Well, it says, 1541 became the first Europeans to report seeing the Mississippi. So yeah, it could have been they saw the Mississippi there and they were still wandering around for like 2 more years. Jesus. Okay, let's talk about the other countries real quick. So we got France. So Spain was making a lot of gains in North America, and even though France and England hate each other more than anything, they do still have a healthy hate for Spain. You know, they're not going to leave Spain out. French and English explorers needed to do something as well. 1524, the French hired the Italian navigator Giovanni di Verrazzano because obviously only the Italians can do exploration. Went to North America, found Cape Fear in North Carolina. Fantastic name for a cape, I guess. And then just sailed all the way up the coast up to what will become New York and claimed all the land for France. He's like, I'm not getting on the land because I might get stabbed. So let's just sail on the coast until we feel like stopping and just say it's all for France. Jacques Cartier, he's actually French, if you can tell from the name. He sailed into the Gulf of St. Lawrence 10 years later, traded with the Mi'kmaq natives, pushed rather deep into Canada on his next trip, but didn't find any, gold laying around like the Spanish did, nor did he find a pathway into the Pacific Ocean like they were hoping. That's the fabled Northwest Passage that everybody wanted to find. Sieur de Roberval, tried to set up a permanent settlement in Quebec in 1542, but they abandoned it within a year because it's Quebec in the 1500s. It's cold. Due to harsh weather, disease, and high mortality. Yeah, Quebec will kill you. I went to Montreal in December, and that was cold, and we had, modern day heat and whatnot. So here's Verrazzano's trip. They make Cape Fear to New York. Hey, look like it's not all that much compared to all of that. I guess Canada's much larger than I think it is. Let's see, here we go, there's Jacques Cartier's. So his first trip, he got through the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The second trip went down into the St. Lawrence River, went by what would become Quebec City, went down to what would become Montreal, but then got to the rapids, like, I'm not taking my ship through that. Turn this thing around. It was actually very hard to find an old picture of Quebec. I don't know if this is the abandoned Quebec, or the Quebec that will be abandoned, or if this is like the Quebec that will become modern Quebec. So it doesn't really matter. It mattered to me at the time. It doesn't matter anymore. I don't care. Obviously, Jacques Cartier is pretty important because he did a lot of exploring. This first attempt at Quebec, we'll talk about the actual permanent settlement of Quebec later. Okay, on to England. Because we're almost done. I wanna get to the end. And then I'll put this up on Blackboard. Okay. The English had a couple of claims in North America, as we mentioned with John Cabot or Caboto. But since they didn't actually have any presence there, the English or the French and Spanish just ignored what they claimed. So Sir Walter Raleigh tried to build a couple settlements. The book mentions them in greater detail, but they all failed, so who cares? On two separate occasions, So he claimed all land north of Florida, which again, that kind of contradicts the whole Cape Fear to New York thing. But I think like claiming land but not settling it gets overturned if you actually settle the land. So I don't know. They're gonna fight each other eventually anyway, so who cares? Inadequate funding of supplies doomed the colony of Roanoke Island. The second time supply ships arrived to find the entire settlement abandoned, that was the Roanoke Island. It's the very famous settlement that just disappeared. By 1590, only Spain had any permanent colonies in the Americas, mostly the West Indies, Mexico, South America. St. Augustine was the only European outpost in North America. That is, of course, down in Florida. So the French and English had not been doing too well with settlements, but they were still hell-bent on colonizing this new land. They just were not nearly as successful as the Spanish. We will discuss, with the little bit of time we have left, on the next slide, the results of the Spanish success. So real quick, I think this is supposed to be Roanoke with the various Outer Banks stuff going on. There's Roanoke, the Croatan carved in the tree. Okay. Last one before the conclusion. So it's hard to overstate how much wealth Spain took from the Americas. Over the course of 150 years, they took 180 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver. Also a lot of platinum, but platinum wasn't seen as valuable yet, so they just chucked it in the ocean. Now this was supposed to, make Spain more wealthy because they had a lot of new wealth. But when you bring in a lot of wealth from an outside system and put it in a closed economic system, it breaks the economy. So they broke the economy. Raised food prices, depressed wages, not just for Spain, but for all of Europe. King Philip II did use it to fund the Spanish military, conquered Portugal and Italy, tightened his grip on the Netherlands. There's a whole thing with the Spanish Netherlands that will, if you take my European history course, 104, we'll talk about. Eventually, they did create a council to discuss the abuses in the Incognita system. Bartolomé de las Casas, he was my Dominican friar professor's hero. He actually cared about the lives of the natives. He was opposed by Juan Gines de Sepulveda, unfounded reports of cannibalism to defend Spanish conquest and domination of North America, or the Americas, Native Americans. So here we have lots of gold and silver and some cannons and de las Casas and Sepulveda. So yeah, we actually talk about how bad Spain broke the economy in pretty great detail in my European course. So, in conclusion, things were changed for the worse for the natives. Map makers were able to do more stuff, and yeah, that's about it. I'll put this up on Blackboard today. And for you online folks, I'll have a discussion up later today too. So I'm going to turn this off while everybody moves. Talk to you in a minute. So, online folks. Yeah, I'm going to post all this on Blackboard as soon as I can. Let's go back to this real quick. And I'll put the discussion up, maybe not immediately because I need to get to my next class, but later today, and just so everybody knows, it's not due until like Saturday-ish. I'll look at them Sunday, so no rush. And I'm probably going to do my default one, which you'll see when I put it up there. So yeah, I hope everything worked okay. I hope the video worked okay. The videos aren't super important, but it's just something I think's funny. If it doesn't work for you, just check the link when I post the PowerPoint. It should just be able to take you right to it. It's just a little like 3-minute video, I think. Anyway, that should be it. If you have any issues, let me know. Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye.